The employee interaction is really activating those core values, turning those core values into the story that I'm living out every day. I'm working with a team right now that has the mission statement of adding value in everything we do. Can your leader, can your manager, instead of evaluating you on, did you get all your tasks done? What if you asked, how did you add value today? It connects me to the brand. It makes my work purposeful and meaningful because I know my context, I know my story, and it's something that I'm getting measured on all day long.
Welcome to the Work for Humans podcast. This is Dart Lindsley. Alice Fairfax was overjoyed when she was hired at Disney to be an improvisational street performer and storyteller. But there was a problem. She needed to draw and hold a crowd, and she had no idea how to do it. She was determined to learn the trade, though, and she learned by doing, that the audience must feel seen and involved as a part of the story for a performance to succeed. Alice now uses this experience to guide others in sharing their own stories and helping companies and individuals build their brands through story to connect with employees, customers, and audiences. Alice has been a Walt Disney World performer for over 20 years, accumulating over 10,000 hours of performance experience in storytelling, improvisation, and comedy. She's also a ghostwriter, scriptwriter, keynote speaker, workshop facilitator, and author of 2 books on creativity and performance, The Creative Life and Tell Your Story. In this episode, Alice and I talk about the power of a story in creating a brand narrative, identifying and demonstrating your brand's core values, the importance of connecting employee wants and needs with those of the company, identifying what your target audience really wants, the key to engaging an audience and winning their trust, distinguishing a job from a task, and how to tie the two together, universal themes that can unite brands, employees, and customers, and much, much more. Thank you for joining us today. If you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And now I bring you Alice Fairfax. Alice Fairfax, welcome to Work for Humans.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
How do you describe what you do for a living?
Well, I tell people that I'm a story coach. That's kind of the phrase that I use, and mostly it's what people kind of bestow on me after I work with them. Because, most people recognize the importance of story and the power of story and that they need to be telling a good story. But most people also are just overwhelmed when they look at a blank page or a waiting microphone. The terror comes over them. And now people are looking at those blank pages more often than they ever have been. Companies, brands, executives, employees, they have to come up with these weekly email newsletters, and there's all this social media that has to be done. So especially for small companies that don't have a dedicated team that is telling their story, they look at that social media calendar and they just despair. And so I try and put some tools in their hands that help them to see it in a different way and that help them to shape their story.
I'll tell you, one of the things that's particularly dicey these days, I notice, is that whenever I get in front of a microphone, somebody's probably recording it and they can put it on YouTube or something and everybody will see it. So it's kind of higher stakes than it used to be just talking to a room.
I agree. In fact, Brene Brown, when she goes to speak, you are not allowed to record in the room because it's a conversation, because there's an exchange of energy. So part of that comes from knowing what the room is and knowing what that exchange of energy is going to be, or being able to read what that exchange of energy is going to be. That's an important tool in sharing your story. But the really, really important root of that is that you have to know who your story is, who you are, and what you want to say, so that you're always going back to that. In all of your answers, it always correlates back to that core of who you are, whether that's as a person, as myself, Alice Fairfax, the story coach, or as yourself, or as a brand. or as a company. We have to know who we are as a company.
And so we're going to circle around a couple of things, I think, during this conversation. One of them is going to be I'm always going to bring it back to the experience of work and how story affects us, the story that we are in as people working in a company and how that affects our experience. What I want to start with, though, is your experience doing street theater. Because to me, that's a part of where you got your 10,000 hours of experience that gave you that honed idea of what story really needs to be.
Absolutely. It's probably, yes, well over 10,000 hours of that. I started out my career, my life as an actor, wanting to be an actor, going to theater school and thinking that that's where I was going to be. And when I started my career, the work that I could find was I was here in Orlando, and the work that I could find was doing theme park acting work. There was work that was happening in theme parks that was interactive, where actors were doing what we would call interactive comedy. So you'd start with a character, or you'd start with a premise, or start with a story and involve the audience, interact with them. A bunch of my friends were doing this work, and I just was not a natural at it. I was not good at it. It scared the heck out of me I saw myself on a stage with the wig and the lights on me and the whole thing, and the script memorized, really controlling essentially the situation. And this felt so uncontrolled. And so because I was not a natural at it, and because this was the work that was there, that was available, I had to figure it out. And so what was great for me was because I wasn't a natural at it, and there were so many people that I was working with out at Disney World that were naturals at it, they were so natural at it and so good at it, they couldn't explain it. So I got to really watch and really write down, okay, this works this way. Oh, this is how you invite an audience in. This is how you come under the energy and invite the audience in and then raise the energy. This is how you tell a story and leave gaps in it for the audience to contribute and to participate. This is how you add on to what they participated without losing the story, without losing the thread. The great thing about working at Disney World was you had a window. It's a 30-minute window, right? So if my show starts at 11:30, at 12 o'clock, the Beatles tribute band is going to play their first note. So yay that you are having an incredible show. Whoopee for you. It's not going 2 hours. It's over when the Beatles start playing. I once had a show, Mary Poppins walked behind me because it was her time to come out and I'd run over. Well, guess what happens when 300 people see Mary Poppins behind you? They run for Mary Poppins. You become nobody. So even though I was having this great show, it was over. So you had to learn how to always come back to the story. So figuring out what were the bones of the story, where's the flow, where's the energy, where can you add on, and how do you drive it back to the story? So yeah, that's kind of the workplace, the workshop for learning this.
And people weren't sitting in a chair, right? They just would either come to watch you and be engaged by you, or they would walk away.
Yes. Yes. Many walking away, many staying, especially at 2 p.m. in August. That is not a comfortable thing to sit on the ground on a curb that is sizzling and you're wearing shorts. You don't really want to stay there. Um, so we were always hunting the shade and hunting places to find and inviting people to come and sit and take your backpack off and sit on your backpack and find a spot here, sit on the curb. It was literal street theater. So yes, people were gathering in. We were gathering that crowd and then trying to engage them so that they would stay.
And what does it mean to come in under the energy?
Yeah, that's probably an Alice term, an Alice way of looking at it. I'm very fascinated by the energy of a crowd and the energy of a performance and that exchange of energy between a performer and a crowd. And so for me, I'm always looking for what I call the underscoring. Like in live theater, and certainly in street theater, there's no underscore like there is in a movie, right? But I'm looking for what is the melody that's happening here? What's the pace? What's the tone? So sometimes in my workshop, I'll have us do work where we put on a jazz album and do some storytelling to that. And then we tell the same story to a classical album or to rock, or what's the underscore going to be? We take different movie themes and get that feeling of what that pace is. And what I would notice when stage actors like myself would come and try to learn how to become street actors, more interactive actors, is what you would do is you would come out with this energy, this performance energy of, I'm on a stage, I am about to perform. And it would be performing at you, at the audience. And so I really developed this energy listening skill of understanding where the audience was at. And then I would train other actors and other teams to listen to that energy, figure out where they were at. That 2 o'clock afternoon in December during the holidays when it's beautiful and there are hundreds of thousands of people there, that is a very different energy. There's probably 300 or 400 just waiting for our show. And they are connected and they are excited. And so you want to come in, feel that energy, and meet that energy, come right under it of, okay, we're excited to be here too. Now I'm going to take your energy up a notch. I'm going to take it up a notch until it's insane amphitheater cheering feeling. Now, if I came in with that same energy at 2 p.m. in August when there's 10 people milling around and it's hot as heck, and I came in with that amount of energy, I would blow them away. I would destroy them. I would almost irritate them like, oh, stop, just stop. So what's the energy? Are they just like, we're bored and we're hot. Oh, well, let's do something fun together. And I'm going to come under that energy and then I'm going to raise it up one notch. I'm never going to get to amphitheater crazy with that 10 people, 2 p.m. in the heat, but I am going to get to connected maybe.
You said something interesting that stage actors come on and are in control. I mean, they're accustomed to being in control. They have a script. They don't have to improvise. So that there's that one thing. But there's also, they're the one in the lights. There seems to be a different kind of potentially ego involved. Whose story is it when somebody's on the stage? And whose story is it when you're out immersed in a crowd? And whose story does it need to be?
Well, and this is what really I learned from street theater. It's always the audience's story. We talked a lot about the audience being the star of the show, and that my job is to serve. My job is to serve the audience. My job is to serve the story. My job is to serve the moment, serve the experience. And what I've come to realize is that's really true of all the great actors. That's true of the great stage actors. They are there to serve. They're there to serve the words, they're there to serve the story, they're there to serve the audience. And for me, the audience is always the star of the show. We talk a lot about in storytelling about character. So every character in a story, in a play, in a movie has a want and a need. You and I right now interacting, you have a want and a need, I have a want and a need, and we're interacting based on that. Am I going to get my wants and my needs fulfilled in this conversation? Are you going to get yours fulfilled in this conversation? If I didn't want something, I don't leave my house. You have to want something, right? So every great character from Odysseus on to me right now has a want. And it sends them on a journey. It sends them somewhere. So that audience wants something. They want something. They need something. And if they are coming in to see Hamilton, they want to see that show. They want to know that story. And so serving the higher message of that story, that's why I'm always looking at what is the universal theme that bonds all of us together in this moment. So what is that big theme that bonds us together? And that really helps me to serve. So if I know what that theme is in a story, If I know what that theme is in a brand, if I know what that theme is in a script, then I'm able to connect with my audience. No matter what the details are, I'm able to connect with my audience.
I want to take this conversation two directions. I'm not sure which way first. Let me ask one quick question, I guess, which is the stories that you make or that you coach people to make, are they all made out of words or are they sometimes made out of other materials?
I always start with words. That's what I offer to people. So, how does this translate to companies and employees? When I work with brands, I am working with them on activating their brand narrative. So, what do I mean by that?
Yes. What do you mean by that? And there's their brand narrative externally, but then there's how their brand narrative plays internally. So, what do you mean by that? And how does that dynamic work?
And I work with companies on both things. Some companies just want me to work on the external, some companies want me to work on the internal, and then some companies have me work on both, and I just get as excited by either. So, when you're thinking about activating a brand narrative, who are you and what is your story? What are you telling people about yourself? So, for instance, in physical spaces, if we are focusing on how do we activate this for our customers, for our guests. So when you think about a physical space like a lobby, what makes the lobby of one hotel different from the lobby of another hotel? And even brands in big cities like Hilton will have several different versions of Hiltons in New York City, in Paris, in in Orlando, right? Marriott will have several different Marriotts. What makes that space different? Well, it's the story. It's who you are saying you are. And so activating that physical space, and I always go back to Epcot, which was my Disney World home, was Epcot. Epcot, without the story, is a mall. It's retail shops and restaurants. And if there isn't a story of an experimental prototype community of tomorrow, there it is. There's the story. We can activate tomorrow. We can activate community. We can activate prototype. We can activate experimenting. We can activate those things by creating events, creating experiences. And they've done that beautifully there. The Epcot Food and Wine Festival is going on right now as you and I talk. In January, they were finding a dead space in January. They activated that with a festival of the arts. They bring Disney Broadway folks down and do a big concert series. That's experimental, that's community, that's of tomorrow, that's all of these things that you can activate. I work on that a lot. Like, okay, well, who are we? Who do we say we are? What experience do we want our guests to have? When our guests come here, what do they want? What do they need? What kind of experience are they expecting? If it's the airport Marriott, they're expecting a very different experience than the JW Marriott Resort that's out by the parks, right? That's a very different experience. So, what is that narrative? Who are you? And how do we activate that and make those experiences? That's the external. Then the internal, the employee narrative, that is about employee interaction. So some of that is employee interaction with guests. But for me, the employee interaction is really activating those core values, turning those core values into the story that I'm living out every day, because that empowers me as an employee. It connects me to the brand. It empowers my work. It makes my work purposeful and meaningful. And then when I extend that, when I step into the story, by activating that with my guests, if I'm a frontline employee, then that becomes very powerful and meaningful to me. So, for understanding, what is your core value? What is your mission statement? What is your phrase? And how do you activate that? I'm working with a team right now that has the mission statement of adding value in everything we do. Well, this is just a gold mine for me. I'm just so thrilled to be around that because as an employee, can I use that? Can I use my core value as a measurement for my work? Can your leader, can your manager, instead of evaluating you on, did you get all your tasks done? Did you meet all these things? What if you asked, hey, how did you add value today? How do you feel you added value today? Here's how I felt you added value today. Oh my gosh, that would just be so exciting to me to have that measurement. And then to think about if I'm a frontline employee and I'm in this lobby and I know the story of this lobby, I know who we want to be, I can start adding value all day long. I can start activating that core value of, for Disney, the core values of safety, courtesy, show, efficiency, and diversity. Or I think they might be inclusion. It was 4 keys: safety, courtesy, show, efficiency. And they've added a diversity and inclusion key as a 5th key. But I can activate those core values. I can activate that courtesy core value because I know my context, I know my story, and it's something that I'm getting measured on all day long, and I can measure myself on.
So I'll tell you where this is super interesting. We just launched the podcast that was with Fred Reichheld. Fred Reichheld's the person behind customer loyalty and net promoter score, which measures how much your customer is loyal to your brand, essentially. And what I probed when I was speaking to him was, how do you create a connection to that mission? The mission of loving the customer and doing the best for the customer every single day. How do you make that connection with people in your company? And a part of what I'm hearing you say is that story is absolutely crucial to making that connection.
I think story is purpose. Story adds purpose. When you are considering your own wants and needs and what's driving those wants and needs, and you are considering the company's wants and needs, their core values, and what's driving that, then that's a place where I can hop on. So story is, we talk about story being a thread. That's where I can connect. What is that connection point? Story is that for me. I know I shared this with you that I use a narrative tool that I call the story formula. When you start with that blank page, I put the story formula at the top of that blank page. And the story formula is this: every story must be universal so we relate, specific so we care. So that's where I start. So, what are the universal themes? What are those universal themes that connect me to literally anyone on the planet? My stories about working at Disney World, that is very specific. That's very specific. Not everyone has done that. Not everyone has been a performer at Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida. So why do people care about that? Why do they relate to that? They care because it's specific and it's interesting. They can start to see that picture and they're painting that picture and it's engaging their imagination. That's what makes them care. But that relationship to it, like where do I relate, is in that universal theme. The stories that I've shared so far is I was a person with a dream. I wanted to be an actor and I found my place there. And then I found I wasn't very good at it. And I had to figure out how to be good at it. And then I became so good at it that it became my life's work and my purpose. Right? So that's a story that literally anyone on the planet can relate to. I have a dream. I'm pursuing it. I fail at it. I grow.
Mm-hmm.
That's a story. That's a narrative thread that anyone can jump onto. So I think about that for customer loyalty because you're right. It's not motivating for me as an employee I need to engage that customer and make them loyal. I need to make them feel good. The gas runs out of that tank real fast. And especially when I get a rude guest, which, by the way, is going to happen more and more and more these days, it seems. So I have to have a narrative arc that drives me, that's compelling to me. So I do a lot of work with employers about, okay, what are your core values? And then how do we talk to our employees about what their personal core values are? My core values, Alice's core values are creativity and connection. Those are my big core values. I want there to be creativity and I want there to be connection. And so I'm looking for ways to experience that when I work with people. Am I experiencing connection? Am I able to make connection? And you may not state your value as creativity and connection, But for instance, at Walt Disney World, safety, courtesy, show, efficiency, well, I'm finding creativity in there. I'm finding connection in there. And so that's a place where I can really thrive. That's a story that agrees with my story.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So for a while now, I've been doing a research into how people experience work. And one of the things I realized is that the story you think you're in has a huge effect on how you perceive your entire world. For instance, you could be in a small room with steel walls and a steel toilet and a steel bed and no windows. And you could be in prison for a crime that everybody thinks you did, but you didn't do. Or you could be flying to Mars and you're going to be the first person to circle Mars and come back to Earth. Same amount of time, same environment, different story that you're in, and a totally different experience. And so there's this dual side to story that affects the experience of work. And one is, who does it make me? You talked about character. When a company makes a story, does it cast people who work in the company as a certain kind of character?
Well, yes, and is my answer. All of this can go towards a manipulative side too.
Yeah, and that's right. That's absolutely right. And I don't want it to be manipulative. So it has to be authentic and honest and let people into the story who want to be a part of that story on purpose, right?
Well, it's exactly what we were talking about before about going back to what I learned in street theater is I have my narrative. I have my story structure, and I know it needs to last no more than 25 minutes. But I know where the opening gaps are. Where is the flow where that audience member and that those audiences can offer what they have to offer within this context, and I can agree with it and absorb their offer and make it part of the story. There were so many times when, I had a kid lose a tooth during the middle of a show. I had a guy split his pants because he was dancing so hard. Those things happen. So, how do you incorporate that and make that part of the story and make that a yes? And I think that's the difference there that if you decide, okay, we are going to, I mean, we're seeing this in real time right now. I don't know when this will air, but we're seeing Twitter being taken over and said, this is what you will be like. And we're seeing a reaction to that. So today, you and I don't know how that's going to play out, but that decision that this is who you will be, that rarely goes well. When I talk about this story, I talk about making an offer. I have a story. I know what the beginning is, the middle is, and the end. I know the outcomes that I want to have. I'm making an offer to the audience to be part of it. I'm inviting them to be part of it. And the bigger invitation is I'm inviting you to be who you are in this story. And we're going to incorporate that into the story.
That's the really key thing, which is I'm inviting you into this story as you know, and preferably as much of you as possible, right? So let's talk about the steps. Let's say I want to build the story of my organization and I want to create an inviting platform in that story that people can enter into. What are the steps that you would lead somebody through to get to that?
Well, I really would start with that audience. Who is that target audience? Who are they? The who is the beginning point. That's really what I want to know. Usually people start with who they are and what their message is. I want to know, who are you talking to? And what do you know about what they need? And if you don't know enough, we need to go out and find out more about what they need, what they think they need, what they're telling you. Who are they and what do they want? Then I can look at, who am I and what do I have to offer and where are the meeting points there? So I really do start with that who. And the way I do it is as an actor would do a script. When you get a script, when you're an actor, you go through and you look for the character's motivation. And so what I'm looking for is wants and needs. What are the wants? What are the needs? An easy tool for that is I use Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I just look at that and say, okay, where are these folks in their lives? Where are they? Do they have needs that are at the base of that pyramid that are survival needs, that are basic needs? Are they in the middle place? What they need is love and belonging. You always wanna look up when you're looking about wants and needs, because you may be a company that offers something basic. You may offer security for your home. You may offer a roofing company. That is a really serious survival need here in Florida. How we just had 2 hurricanes. So roofing is important. You may be, a children's theater company. So that's love and belonging, right? That's a different spot, but you're always looking up on that need. And I frame it for people. I share stories about myself and my son. My son Henry, he's 26 now and he has autism. And he is a talk show host. He has always been a talk show host. That's how he talks about life. That's how he relates to life. I mean, the amount of David Letterman top 10 lists we have done in our life is really beyond comprehension. But this is how he communicates. So, when he was young, when he was first diagnosed, I was dealing with things like sleep, like the right kind of diet, like toileting issues, like behavior where he would pick at a place on his nose and have a scab. So that would go under self-injurious behavior. That's real basic on Maslow's hierarchy of need. That is survival stuff. But what motivated me to work with groups, to find the right place for him, it was always looking up. It was always, I wanted him to be at the top of that pyramid, self-actualized. I want that for him. That's what drives me when I'm working with a company. Are you gonna come in and just teach me how to toilet train him? That's great. See you later. Are you gonna come in and teach me how to toilet train him and teach me how he can become who he wants to be? Oh, now I'm gonna be with you for life. I'm gonna be with that organization for life.
I like the idea of looking up. I've had this belief for a while that it's interesting. We underestimate the complexity of what people want from work, but that's kind of fallen into two places. One place is what people want from work is simply security or simply benefits, and we're going to work on delivering that. The other end of it is people want meaning. And meaning goes sort of all the way right up to the top of religion. And companies don't have to be your religion, right? Companies don't have to be your purpose in life. They can be. So there's this whole range of things in the hierarchy of needs that are somewhere between self-actualization and putting a roof over your head. And that may all need to be activated, right? The whole stack may need to be activated in my engagement with the story of my company.
Yeah, agreed. And I tend to think when you start at that, gosh, I keep going back to, which I love actually, I love seeing this, that I keep going back to my core because it's proving to me that this is actually the work. I'm going back to my core. Start where your audience is. Start where you are. If what you have to offer is this type of work, it is survival type of work, let's be accurate about that. I find the manipulation comes when somebody says, "We're gonna be a family here at this job. We are gonna be a family, and we are gonna help you self-actualize. Now here's your paper hat, go start flipping burgers." What just happened? Wait, what? But when you say, we are gonna flip burgers because people love our burgers, and people I was in California recently. I'm not there often, but I was in California recently, and literally 5 people said, "You've never had an In-N-Out burger? What is wrong with you? As soon as you get off the airplane, you go get an In-N-Out burger. You must get an In-N-Out burger." Like, what are they talking about? I don't even know. How is this possible? So if you say, "Yeah, we are gonna make burgers, and we are gonna make burgers so well, and with this recipe, and in this way, that people across the country will say, 'I'm setting aside time to go get this sandwich.'" That has meaning to it. That to me is looking up. That is, I'm acknowledging where I am and I'm looking up, as opposed to manipulative of, we want you to have so much meaning and purpose in your life, and you're going to do these menial tasks. Start with the task. What are those tasks? And how do we look up? And how do we have a vision and a purpose and a drive?
Did they tell you about the secret menu?
No.
There's a secret menu
What?
at In-N-Out Burger. That's right. It's not there. But there's like this whole coded secret menu that you can go in and you can ask for it. And then you're kind of an insider at In-N-Out Burger, right?
That's a story. That is a story. That's a narrative. That's inviting people into a narrative.
I know. I want to keep going down the how-to path. There's also this other thing I don't want to forget. I'm going to just start using the word customer because I frame employees as customers. I believe that, honestly, employees are customers. So I'm just going to start saying customer. So when you have this customer, how do I learn about them? Because when you were doing street performance, you had to learn about them in the instant. But when you're doing a story that's going to build a whole brand, how do you learn about where the customer is in terms of what they need?
I think it really stems back to the core values. There's initial work that happens there, and then there's deep dive work during the weekly and the daily interaction between manager and employee, between one-on-one, between colleagues. But that initial relationship comes from that invitation. This is who we are. This is who our core values are. And we're inviting you into this. Is this a right fit for you? These are the things that we hold dear that drive our company. And so, is that of interest to you? Do you want to be a part of that? I worked for many years at Universal Studios, really early in my career, right out of college. I loved it. I still love Universal. It is not the right fit for me. They are very edgy. Their big event is Halloween Horror Nights. Okay, I just cannot bear that. I cannot bear horror movies. I can't stand it. I just don't like that at all. It is not a right fit for me. It is not that they are bad. It's just not like, they are edgy. They are so rock and roll. They're so cool. They love that kind of stuff, that counterculture-y stuff, and making things really edgy, and I am not that. I don't love doing that. I like things softer. When I talk about story, people always talk about, well, you have to hook your audience. I don't even like that. That's too pushy for me. I like to say, you want to open a window for your audience. You want to invite them in. I talk about opening a window and engaging their imaginations, whereas somebody else teaching the same material would say, what's the hook? How do you hook them? So that's a personal expression of me. So I worked at Universal for 7 years and loved it, right? But I wasn't going to grow there because our values were different. They had different interests than I had.
What's interesting about what you just said is that even a hook and a window, neither of them is about pushing people. Both of them are about drawing in. It's just a question of how forceful it is. But that's always what it is, right? It's always this drawing in. It's one of the things I think Musk has really failed at, which is you go in and you push, as opposed to you go in and you draw forward.
It's a traumatizing for people.
And we all naturally push back. I had a job for a little while where my job was to call people on the phone and extract their entire resume over the phone by talking to them. What I learned was if I went in and tried to push that to happen, I couldn't do it. But I developed something called the retreating interview, where I would talk to them and they'd say, I don't want to talk to you. I say, oh, great. And I'd back up and I'd say, look, I make this kind of call all the time. Could I call you again in the future if there's something that comes along? So I'm ending the call. I'm telling them I'm ending the call. They're like, oh, this guy's ending the call. That's great. He's not pushing me at all. I say, great. Let me make sure I don't call you about the wrong thing in the future because I don't want to waste your time. Great. He's still backing up. What do you do? I had 3% decline rate on that approach because it was all draw and it was no push.
And one of the greatest needs, you can always find this need and this want. in any audience, in any customer, is the need, the desire to be seen and heard. Everyone wants to be seen and heard. So if you open that window, if you lay that hook, if you set that environment where someone can be seen and heard, you're going to win every time. You are going to win every time. It's what you do with it after that that is part of your story. That if you are a controlling boss and that isn't where you're going to want them to go, then those people are going to leave. But if you set the table and invite them to it, somebody always will tell you who they are and what they want and what they need. They always will, because we all want to be seen and heard. We all do.
How do you get the audience on your side? And is that a real thing? Because I experience that I feel that I'm on somebody's side or I'm not on their side. You just were talking about being seen, and I think that's part of it, but are there other parts? And is it necessary?
100% necessary. And it's really my favorite part. And part of the reason I think it's my favorite part is, as I said, I wasn't good at it. I was one of those ones that was going to come out and perform at you. And I had to learn this. And then I got to teach this. And one of the stories that I share in my book is a story about me and my friend Mark Daniels. Mark is a great audience interactor. He is now the warm-up host for Disney Live events, so like the Christmas parade. He also is the warm-up host at most Star Wars events. So like he introduces George Lucas and Harrison Ford. So back in the day when he and I were working together, he was very much a comedian. And I tell this story about he and I went out to do a show in Epcot, and there were 3 people waiting for us. And our show, we pulled 3 people out of the audience to be in it. And the way we'd scheduled the day was I was going to tell the story and Mark was going to do the audience warm up. Well, the audience warm up of 3. And he literally looks at me and he says, "Well, we can't do the show. We're canceling the show." And I said, "No, I think we can do it. They've got their maps out, their times guides out. They came specifically to see this 11 o'clock show. And so we need to do it." And he's like, "Oh, nope, it is not going to happen. There's only 3 of them." And I said, no, I can do it. Let's switch. I will do the audience warm up and you tell the story. So he went out to go gather more people. And I could see it was very, very early. Park had just opened, like 15 minutes after the park opened, and we were on the way other side of the park. But I could see a couple people here and there. So I started with this group of 3. And again, it was the invitation. Like, how do you engage them? How do you invite them into it? Well, for me, it is all about action. So a story is about action. My goal was I need to get more people here to start this show. So again, this is what you and I have been talking about is there's a practical goal and there's a higher thematic goal. So if I had come at them with, "You 3 are not enough, we need more people to start this show," they would have been like, bye-bye, you're a jerk, right? But I came at them with, "We have a secret mission. I am so excited to see the 3 of you. I can see that you have planned to be here at this show. Great news. We bring 3 people out of the audience into the show, and there's 3 of you. So I'm very excited. But what we need to do is get a few more people here to see you be in this show. This is going to be great. Let's do this together." And so I'm talking to them in this lower voice. I'm engaging with them and telling a few little jokes. It was like a little heightened conversation, because if it had been too conversational, then people walking by would have thought we were just 3 people. I was somebody who worked in a shop having a conversation with 3 guests. But I needed to have this little bit of heightened energy, this little bit of excited conversation. So I'm having this conversation with them and people start walking by. Now, here's the key. As people are walking by, if I look past my 3 people kind of hungrily at the other 2 people walking by, "Oh, we need them," I lose the 3 and I don't gain the 2. I have to stay engaged with my 3 people so that those 2 people are like, "What is happening over there? Something really interesting. I want to be part of that. I want to belong with the fun group. We are the fun group. We're doing something really interesting. And once you get close to me, then we invite you in. So you got close to me, so then we invited you in. So we gained about 10 people. It was a fine show. It wasn't, stop the world, momentous, but it was a fine show. We gained that crowd. We had a great time. Those 3 people who had planned to come see that show had a wonderful experience. And of course, as we left, Mark had gotten up and told the story. And after we left, he said, "Okay, I actually did not go out and hawk the crowd and get more people. I stood inside the shop watching to see what you were doing. I got it. I got it now. I will be doing the pre-show tomorrow." And now he's gone on, and this is what he does, is the pre-show, and I take total credit, of course, naturally. Um, but that level of, you must be doing an action. You can't be begging other people to come, and I apply this also to when you're trying to gain social media followers, when you're trying to gain an audience share, right? Engage with the people that are there. Engage deeply, make it someplace interesting, create action, create interaction, make it someplace that people want to be. Because what do people need? They need to be seen and they need to be heard. And if I walk by and I see somebody being seen and being heard, I want to be a part of that. I want to belong. I want to be with the cool kids.
Also, you did something really powerful there, I think, in that story, which was a story, which was you shared the problem with the core people that you needed. We have a challenge right here, which is that you're going to be in this show and we're going to get an audience. We don't have any audience. And, so you brought them into that. When I was a recruiter, I used to go to college campuses and I used to recruit engineers. And the way to recruit engineers is to say, I have a technical puzzle. Here's my technical puzzle. And at the time I was working for this microscope company that looks at chips, I said, here's the problem. We have to look at features so small that we have to use ultraviolet. The problem is ultraviolet is so powerful, is such a strong thing that it destroys the sample. And so that's our problem. And I would give them a physics problem. And I would say, those people over there, you work for them. Their problem is they try to help people balance their checkbooks. Our problem is it's a deep physics problem involving ultraviolet and small, nano features. So I could get a crowd that way of people who wanted to hear about the problem and be drawn into it.
Well, drama is conflict. I used to say this early on when I worked with large groups and I worked with a large church, and I would say, well, where's the conflict in this? No, there's no conflict. Marketing teams never want to talk about conflict. The CEO does not want to talk about conflict. There's no conflict here. So the only way to tell a good story is to find the conflict. Drama is conflict. It is overcoming conflict. So I don't say that anymore to higher ups. That's like a special little secret between me and the marketing team. So I'll say, what is the solution? What is the issue? What is the challenge? What is the challenge for your audience? What do they most need? That's another way, of course, of saying it. The other thing that I think is so key about what you were saying and what we were just talking about is this second part of the story formula, of my story formula, is specific so they care. So part of what is really compelling to an audience is when you can paint a picture. So imagine paint by numbers, but leave a couple numbers undone. When you paint a picture for them, their imagination will start to engage. When you overpaint a picture, when you tell a story, when you give too many details, again, you're performing at them. They don't need to engage. So I tell a story about an interaction that I had with Mickey Mouse during the holidays. And I'm very, very intentional when I tell this story. And I tell it in my upcoming book, and I tell it in every workshop that I do. I'm very intentional about saying that Mickey was wearing his holiday hat. And I don't say what kind of hat. I paint the picture enough. We're at Epcot. We're in Mexico. Mickey is coming on a big red double-decker bus. So now you're starting to see it. You can see it in your mind's eye. And Mickey comes by and he's waving, and he's he's all dressed up for the holidays. He's got his holiday hat on, and the kids are going crazy. So I'm telling this story. So then later in the workshop, I will talk about this principle, about specific so we care and engaging that imagination. And I will ask, what kind of hat was Mickey wearing? Well, it was holiday hat. What did that look like? Well, everyone knows it was a top hat with a sprig of holly. Like 4 or 5 people will say that. Oh, no, 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 no. I saw Mickey with a Santa hat. Yeah, and I'm sure he had on kind of a stocking cap that had snowflakes designs on it, a big pom-pom on it. Okay, I've worked at Walt Disney World long enough that I have literally seen Mickey wear every single one of those types of hats. So I don't even remember which one it actually was. But if I had said, Mickey had his little Santa hat on, they don't need to do anything. But the red bus, it's the holidays, Mickey Mouse, he's wearing a hat. They start painting, painting, painting. Their imaginations are going. Now they are bonded to me and to each other. This is what story does. Their imagination is doing the work. I'm always telling people I want my audience doing way more work than I do. I want them working hard because I am guiding them through this process. I know the beginning, I know the middle, I know the end. I'm going to toss out a little conflict for them. Let's get them energized. Let's get them activated. Let's get their imagination going. That is what bonds them together. It connects them. It connects them to me. It connects them to the brand. It connects them to the bigger story. They are getting active and involved. They're not passively receiving entertainment. Their imagination is going, and that is what's creating this exchange of energy.
I put a hat on Mickey Mouse in that story, and it was the hat. I like it better than the Santa hat. Thank you. The hat I chose was just better because it was the one I chose, because I chose the best one I could think of, right? And so I'm engaged. But also now you're talking about a level of co-creation of story. And if somebody's on your side and trusts you, there is a co-creation and it's going to be co-productive. But if it gets into a place where you're not trusted and they're not on your side, there's still going to be co-creation, but it's going to be the most negative story possible. And so what's interesting also is that Mickey Mouse in your story, I have positive associations with that. I gave Mickey Mouse a positive hat. So that was an advantage there. The trust of Disney, I think, is something that helps there. And the trust of those characters. The co-creation idea is very compelling because what you're inviting people in to do is to help write the story. Here's our story. You're a character in this story. We're going to open a window for you. We're going to let you in. But it's not our story that you're joining. It's not my story you're joining. It's our story. We're going to co-create this story together. Let's color it in.
That is exactly, when you're talking about employee engagement and ultimately employee retention, that's what we want, isn't it? And the key thing is the trust there, that if you are true to your core values, they will see that. And if they are in agreement with those core values and you invite them into what does the expression of this core value of, okay, our number one core value is connection. Our number one core value is excellence. Like if that's something that excites you, this is how we do that. This is how we experience that. This is who we are in this. I once worked with a company where they wanted their employees really engaged in the core values. So they just sent out, did all these exercises. Let's get your opinion. We're forming our core values together. And then ultimately the CEO decided these are the 4 core values. And they weren't anywhere on that list. Guess what? No employee retention there. Bye-bye. Lots of people left. They weren't angry at that. They weren't angry at that day. There weren't a lot of people marching around the office going, they didn't choose my core value. It was just another very clear example. Okay, your core values are actually you, what you want, and how you want this to be, and I don't fit. There's no opening here. I can't paint myself into this picture. And my contribution doesn't mean anything to you, CEO. My contribution has to mean something to you. It has to be part of the fabric of this story that we are weaving together.
You've been involved in drafting onboarding. I'd like to learn more about that because I can see that being a couple of things, which is that onboarding itself is an immersive story. It's an immersive experience, but also it's an onboarding into the story of the company. And so, what have you done in that space?
Mostly that, like taking a look at what kind of onboarding are you doing? There's a phrase that's very famous at Disney. Disney Institute teaches it, and we teach it at Traditions. I was part of the Traditions team, which is the onboarding team at Walt Disney World through the Disney Company. And what we teach in the first day of Traditions, we talk about job over task. So when we onboard, the first thing we onboard you for is your job. Then I'm going to send you to your department and you are going to learn your tasks. So, for instance, the job at Disney World is we create happiness. That is everybody's job at Disney World. That's our kind of our mission statement. That is what we do. We create happiness. We don't create magic because that's impossible. We don't make magic. That is not possible for us to do on a daily basis. But again, can I measure my success? Did I create happiness today? Yeah. Now, for instance, that story of the warm up with the 3 people. I gathered 10 people for an audience. That was a failure of a show. But did I create happiness? Yeah, I sure did. That was a successful day. So we create happiness. That's our job. And when we onboard, that first day of onboarding at Disney is about the job. What is your job here? It is to create happiness. So what does that look like? What does that feel like? What does that sound like? What does that smell like? How do you do that with these 4 keys of ours, our 4 core values: safety, courtesy, show, efficiency? How do you create happiness and make it safe? How do you create happiness and make it courteous? How do you create happiness and make it a good show? How do you create happiness and make it efficient? We share stories about creating happiness. We share stories about when it didn't work out well and what I did to overcome that. And so there's exercises on the core values, but it's really all about the job over the task. So the task then is when you get to your workplace. I'll give you 2 contrasts here. When I was 16 years old, I worked in merchandise at the Magic Kingdom. So my tasks were restocking the shelves, wearing polyester because I was in Tomorrowland, and ringing up customers using the cash register. So those were some of my tasks. The ending point for me as a performer at Disney World, some 20 years later, was being friends with the fairy godmother in the castle restaurant. So my tasks there were singing Bibbidi Bobbidi Boo, greeting guests, asking about their birthdays, and doing a little show with a little light magic. So those were my tasks. 16-year-old Alice, merchandise, Tomorrowland. 40-something-year-old Alice, fairy godmother inside the castle restaurant. Same job. We create happiness, different tasks. So onboarding has to be about the job. It has to be about the brand narrative. How do you engage with the brand narrative? Who are you in this? What are the expectations that we have for you about living out who we are as a brand? That's our job. Now I'm going to train you in the tasks, on your day-to-day tasks.
I like that. I like that. It's so easy to do your tasks without doing the job.
But you'll burn out on those.
If you do the job, it doesn't matter if you do the tasks. I mean, really.
Failing at a task can be forgiven quite easily and should be. If you have a manager that is, as we said, saying, "This is it's going to be hard work, and if you're not in, you're out." Well, guess what? Everybody's gonna be out because nobody can live like that. That is not sustainable to be a taskmaster. It's not sustainable. But empowering people to do their job will help them succeed at their tasks. Empowering people to do the job will help them succeed at their tasks.
That's right. That's absolutely right. The third show in this podcast was with Barry Schwartz, who wrote the book Why We Work. And one of the things he spoke about was how nobody can really write down what your job is because so much of it is judgment. But he meant tasks. When we were talking about that, your total list of tasks. Well, your total list of tasks does not describe your job as you're using the word job. It describes what your hands are going to do or what your brain is going to do. So yeah, I like this higher order concept.
Again, it goes back to my story formula: universal so we relate, specific so we care. My universal theme for being here causes me to relate to this brand. The specific tasks are what make me care during my day. I always say if it gets too universal, then it's Miss America. What do you want? Well, I want world peace. Like, okay, what does that mean? What does that look like? What does that sound like? What does that smell like? We all want world peace, sure. What does that mean? If it's too universal, there's no stickiness, there's no hook, there's nothing for us to grab onto. But if it's too specific, it's too dull, it's too boring, it's too task oriented, and we lose steam. It's the marriage of those two.
I want to pick one of the stories from your book, and we can pick any one you like. Walt Stack made us want to just do it. I'm thinking about me.
Oh, let's do that one.
So what is that story?
I'm thinking about me is a story that I share again about my son, Henry. Since he has been a little boy, he would kind of be staring off. And I'm always wanted to know what's in his mind. What is going on? What is he thinking about? And all parents want to know this, of course. I have the advantage, I'm going to say, that my son has autism, and so he doesn't express himself in typical ways. So I get to go at things differently, and then he expresses things very differently, and I find windows into his spirit and into his soul in ways that other parents just don't get the opportunity to because he doesn't have the kind of covering and he isn't able to hide who he is very easily. So I'm always desperate to find out what's going on in his mind. And so I would ask him, "What are you thinking about right now? What are you thinking about right now?" And he always, without fail, says it exactly the same. He puts his hands on his shoulders and he says, "I'm thinking about me." And then he tosses his arms way up into the air over his head like a gymnast competing, at their last flip. "I'm thinking about me." And I just would get so frustrated when this would first happen. I would get so frustrated, like, "Yeah, but I wanna know what pictures are in your mind, what subjects." But ultimately, I learned that, well, that's probably true. That is what he's thinking about. He's thinking about him, and then I kind of turned it back on myself, like, even by my wanting to know, "What are you thinking about right now?" That's about me. I'm thinking about me. I wanna know, what are you thinking about, that relates to me? How does this affect me? How am I doing as your mom? That's really basically the question that I was asking. And so I think about this phrase all the time, especially when we're talking about audiences and what do they want? When you're really racking your head and trying to figure out what does my target audience want? I'm thinking about me. That's what they're thinking about. That's what they wanna know.
That is very true. And what do you mean when you say setup is a myth?
Well, we spend a lot of time setting up our stories, and we feel like we need to set a lot of context around our stories, and we need to do a lot of prep work to our audience. And it's just a myth. When you walk out and you say, "I'm about to do a show that has 3 people in it, and there's only 3 people here. Help me." That's all. That's the setup. That is the setup. And we are so tempted. What we really end up doing is, I think it's a nervous habit. It's a way of protecting ourselves. I'm going to do a lot of narrative to explain the context of this story. I'm going to explain the reason this story is so compelling is because, well, when I was 7, my dad took me on a cross country trip and he told me stories. And oh, by the way, my dad was in the Navy. And oh, by the way, we were in Portland and we were going to Washington. Okay, I'm putting you to sleep. I mean, like, who cares? Now, I can make you care about that story if I tell you the universal theme, if I tell you my dad was in the Navy and I just wanted to belong. Every single place I went was a new place and I always wanted to belong. And I found that story was the way that I could belong. There's not a long drawn out set up to that story. Now, I can go back in and color that in a little bit by telling you some of those experiences and opening some windows there that you can start painting pictures. But when we really get to that heart of that story, what is the real problem here? What was the challenge? And how do I overcome it? Then you're with me on the journey. Then you want to know some of those other stories. When I tell you that the real problem for me was wanting to belong, oh, now all of a sudden, you're going to go back and re-listen to this whole podcast, and you're going to hear it everywhere. You are going to hear my theme of wanting to belong. When I talk about my core values being creativity and connection, that's because I want to belong. When I tell you that my passion is storytelling and getting people to tell their stories, it's because I want everybody else to belong. I don't want anybody else to feel like they don't belong.
Yeah. I taught fiction writing at the University of Colorado. Setting up is a real risk. The place to start is in the middle. And it's interesting because readers will say, I wish you'd given me more detail on this thing, but it's actually not true. Readers like some mystery. It keeps them in, right? And so starting off, I was pretty sure I only had 3 seconds before I hit the ground.
I'm in.
You're in. People might say, but I want to know who you are. I said, yeah, you're going to have to wait for that. How'd you get to that situation? I'm sorry, not going to tell you. That brings people in. Yeah.
Yeah. When we're trying to give a speech, or when we're trying to tell our brand narrative on our website, or when we're trying to write a sales pitch, we think, oh, I've got to explain it. I have to tell them about. Anytime I hear the word, oh, this story is about, it's like, we are in trouble now. About is like a bad word to me.
And actually, I want to go back to something we said earlier in the discussion. Is I asked what material you made stories out of, and you say you start with words. But then you spoke about the lobby of the Marriott, and you spoke about the space of the Epcot Center. And in your book, you talk about show, don't tell. And so I'm getting the feeling like sometimes there is another material. It may start with words.
Yeah. You think of it like a screenwriter supplying the screenplay for the cinematographer to paint with light. The cinematographer is figuring out tone and setting from the story, from the words. So I start with the words. The first tool that I usually use is a creative brief, which is a little bit about the target audience. Who are they? What do they want? What do they need? And then what is our goal in this project? And then I write a narrative. It's usually not more than a paragraph. It's a little story about who we are and what we're trying to accomplish and how we're trying to engage. And it's usually in story format. And then we'll take that, and sometimes I work with a creative director who then will break that down into experiences or events or into artwork and graphics and design, into music, into cocktails. Like why does this cocktail work in this bar? It's because it's part of the story. What's the story we want to tell? What is the moment that we want to create? So yeah, there's a lot of different medium that happens. But I always start with a word. I start with a little narrative that I write, a little paragraph, really. And then that engages the people along the way. The head of housekeeping will be engaged and come up with ideas on how they can activate the story in their space and with their employees. I think about, there's 2 different resorts that just opened at Disney World right before the pandemic. One is called the Riviera and one is at the Coronado Springs. They have 2 restaurants. One is Toledo and one is Topolino. One is a Spanish-based restaurant, one is an Italian-based restaurant. They are blocks away from each other on the Disney resort. But what's the difference? How do they activate those spaces? You go into the lobby before you get up to the Toledo restaurant, and there's a guy playing an acoustic guitar, playing a Spanish acoustic guitar. And there's different cocktails that are related, and there's a video that Salvador Dali created with Walt Disney that's playing. So that's totally different activation than what's going on in Topolino that is a reflection of an Italian, resort. It's a totally different story that's being told blocks from each other. So it's about that. It's about what's that story, and then inviting everyone, how will you activate this in your space?
Yeah, that's really interesting. Disney has this nice advantage, which is that you walk through the gate and you're ready to suspend disbelief. Not always the case in a company where I walk through and I may have a concern about being used.
Yes.
Right, which we talked about earlier, which is that it's not about manipulation, and that's a super trick. When we were speaking before this too, you had mentioned that a lot of the storytelling you do is nonfiction storytelling. And that's exactly right? Which is that that's a part of the authenticity, is the nonfiction part. I want to ask you 2 more questions. I always ask this. I think I gave you the heads up, but I always ask, what job do you hire your job to do for you?
Okay, explain that to me. I don't know what that means. I'm sorry.
Nobody does. The first time I say it, nobody knows. Your job hires you to do something for it. What job do you hire your job to do for you?
Well, my job is about creativity and connection. My job helps me to belong in spaces, and it gives me the tools to make other people belong so that nobody's ever that kid that doesn't know where to sit in the cafeteria or walking in on the first day. You have a tool. I am giving you a tool that will help you connect immediately. And that's what my job does for me.
Yeah. Helps people to belong and helps you to belong. I interviewed Susie Wise, who wrote Design for Belonging. I mean, I have to think through what the connection is between what you just said and storytelling, because she essentially described a narrative arc, the path that one takes from the beginning of belonging through the end of belonging, and what are the events along the way that actually help you to belong. Super interesting connection there.
It is about shared universal themes. Where is our connection point? And you can find them in story. How many times have you shared a story with somebody and somebody will say, "Oh my gosh, that has happened to me." That has never happened to you. I can tell you there was one other woman storyteller during the holidays in Mexico in the entirety of the 50 years of Walt Disney World. It's me and Megan. And that's it. That's all it's ever been, me and Megan. It just never happened to you. And yet, you have absolutely had the experience of being in a job that wasn't working and you had to figure it out. You've absolutely been in a place where you needed to engage somebody that was about to walk away, and you needed to figure out a way to do that. When you share a story, somebody's always gonna go, "Oh my gosh, yeah, that reminds me of, oh, that happened to me."
The part that moves them is the part that's the universal.
Yeah.
That they've experienced, yeah. So, how can people learn more about you and your work?
Yeah, you can visit me at alicefairfax.com and connect with me there, and you can sign up to get notice about my new book coming out that currently is called Tell Your Story: Tools to Take You from a Tweet to a TED Talk. And that should be coming out in 2023. So you can sign up at alicefairfax.com, or you can find me on Instagram. The 2 social media places are Instagram, Alice Fairfax, or LinkedIn. And you'll find me there under Alice Fairfax as well.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for coming on the show.
Thank you so much. This was so much fun.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of Work for Humans. If you enjoyed this episode, please give us a 5-star rating wherever you listen to podcasts. And share the show with one person you think would get value from it. Believe it or not, this really helps us grow the show and reach more people who want to build the kind of work that people really want. As always, thank you to my producer Jason Ames at Ninth Path Audio for his insights into content and his high standard for quality. Final note, the opinions shared here are my own and not the views of Google or Cisco Systems. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.